Thank you, Elena. Executive Secretary Zerbo, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation to speak today in my capacity as the President-Designate of the 10th NPT Review Conference. I look forward to contributing to the discussions related to this long overdue disarmament and non-proliferation goal. As multilateral treaties dedicated to the pursuit of a world free of nuclear weapons, both the NPT and the CTBT are vital organs in the body that is the global disarmament and non-proliferation regime. The two treaties share the same objectives of constraining both the so-called horizontal and vertical proliferation of nuclear weapons. Along with the norm against the use of nuclear weapons, the norms against their proliferation and testing are two of the most important achievements of the nuclear era. The failure to codify the norm against testing into legally binding effect remains some of the post-Cold War period's most important unfinished business. And these norms can never be taken for granted. Envisaged as separate building blocks of the international regime, the CTBT and the NPT have now been linked for over 50 years. Although the attempt by some delegates in the 18-nation Disarmament Committee to have the CTBT included in the NPT was unsuccessful, the latter's preamble does seek the discontinuance of all test explosions of nuclear weapons for all time. And of course, Article 5 of the NPT is now interpreted in light of the CTBT and as an effective brake on the qualitative and quantitative improvement of nuclear weapons. And its entry into force is almost universally perceived as one of the most important effective measures under Article 6. This symbiosis between these pillars of the disarmament and non-proliferation regimes has only deepened with the NPT's indefinite extension. You will recall that Decision 2 of the 1995 NPT Review and Extension Conference on the Principles and Objectives for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament prioritized the negotiation of the CTBT by 1996. Since then, the CTBT has been an important element of every review conference outcome, as state parties have rightly recognized the importance of an enforced CTBT to the goals of the NPT. Of the 13 practical steps in nuclear disarmament agreed by the 2000 NPT Review Conference, the very first stresses the importance and urgency of signatures and ratifications without delay and without conditions to achieve the entry into force of the CTBT. On the 64-point action plan from the 2010 Review Conference contained no less than 5 actions related to nuclear testing and the CTBT, including its entry into force. These outcomes from the near universal membership of the NPT are commitments that help reinforce the excellent work done by the preparatory commission of the CTBTO and the Provisional Technical Secretariat to bolster membership of the CTBT and accelerate its entry into force. The determination of NPT state parties to act on these commitments can be seen in the support for resolutions at the First Committee of the General Assembly. through the membership of dedicated groups, such as the Friends of the CTBT, and in cross-regional groupings dedicated to the implementation of the NPT, such as the Non-Proliferation Disarmament Initiative and the Stockholm Initiative, whose recommendations both include urgent calls for the CTBT's entry into force. One of the opportunities presented by the postponement of the 10th NPT Review Conference has been the ability to conduct expanded and enhanced consultations with state parties across all three pillars of the NPT, with representatives in Geneva, New York, Vienna, and capitals. It is perhaps not surprising that the entry into force of the CTBT is a common issue in all three cities and across all three of the NPT's regional groups. This speaks to its importance in the context of the NPT's implementation. Now, events in 2020 reinforced for many that while moratoria on nuclear testing are valuable confidence-building measures, they cannot substitute for a legally binding, verifiable ban on nuclear testing. That is, an enforced CTBT, one that is fully empowered to undertake activities such as on-site inspections. Based on my consultations with the NPT regional groups, I expect these concerns to be raised at the 10th Review Conference. And I expect that many state parties will push for a call for the CTBT's entry into force in any outcome document. I also expect them to seek recognition and validation of the international monitoring system and of the outstanding capacity building work undertaken by the Provisional Technical Secretariat. As in the past, state parties will likely look to support the sustainability of the CTBTO and the Provisional Technical Secretariat, both in terms of human and financial resources. In the context of nuclear disarmament verification, I expect that state parties will want to praise the leadership of the CTBTO in this field, including for its groundbreaking use of advanced technology for this purpose. If the Review Conference can agree on a consensus outcome, this support will lend political and even moral impetus to the entry into force of the CTBT. It will place binding commitments on state parties to make good on that support. Now, one consistent theme throughout my consultations has been whether and how to hold state parties accountable for implementation of commitments made at previous review conferences. Some suggestions have included concrete benchmarks or compulsory reporting on implementation. Obviously, this applies to commitments across all three of the NPT's pillars, but it is also relevant to the CTBT. It is one of the most important questions state parties will have to consider next August. Nuclear testing has been an enduring stain on the international community. So in addition to the security risks posed by testing and its implications for proliferation and the prospect of nuclear war, its impact on human health and the environment has been devastating. The NPT has played a strong role in the efforts to wipe away that stain, and I hope that state parties will continue that support at the 10th Review Conference. And I thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Zlauvinen. Thank you. It's indeed an enduring stain, and we hope that it can be cleared. Thomas, I will pass the microphone to you.
Thank you very much, Elena. I appreciate it. First, I'm happy to see Ambassador Zlauvinen for the first time in more than 20 years. Thank you, Gustavo, for those words. I want to thank the Vienna Center and the Algerian and German missions for sponsoring this. One phrase from Ambassador Kunzla has given me inspiration. I now intend to write a screenplay for a Hollywood action movie to be called No Escape from Dr. Zerbo. Let me emphasize that I am not part of the new Biden administration. So the observations I offer about my expectations are purely personal, but I hope they are of value to the audience. I first want to make a point about the general Biden approach to foreign policy. He has made clear in his statements and in those of the people he's appointed to top positions that the priorities are first to rebuild alliances with European and Asian allies and other partners throughout the world. And that includes not simply being a leader of NATO in terms of telling other NATO countries what to do, but in actually listening to partners. And that includes their interest in the US being active members in treaties such as CTBT, Open Skies, JCPOA, and others. Secondly, it is rebuilding America's credibility. It is reversing the pattern of the last 4 years in which the United States dangerously and simply withdrew from important treaties without seeking to solve problems. And the third key point about the Biden administration is its deep expertise in national security issues, of which arms control is an important element. Specifically, Joe Biden, for more than 40 years, has been one of the most knowledgeable people in the United States Senate and then in the White House on issues of arms control. And that same experience extends to his team. Unlike 4 years ago, he does not come into office believing that he knows more than all the generals and all the scientists. He already knows where he wants to go on reducing the nuclear risk that the current situation poses to the entire world. So those are general points about my expectations about the Biden administration. I do expect the administration to reaffirm the importance of the CTBT and the work of the CTBTO. And I don't need to repeat everything that's already been said about why that work is important to the global non-proliferation and nuclear architecture. I do expect that the US will continue to support the IMO and the CTBTO financially, as is its obligation, and also that it will play a more constructive role in the deliberative work of the PrEP committee. More importantly, I expect that the Biden administration will not repeat the statement of the Trump administration that downplayed the importance of the CTBT. I expect the opposite, that the Biden administration at some point, either in a nuclear posture review or more likely before such a review, to reaffirm the importance of the treaty to the United States. And still more importantly, I see no prospect that the Biden administration will consider a resumption of nuclear testing by the United States. When the Trump administration considered such testing last year, Mr. Biden said that it was as reckless as it is dangerous, and has further stated that it is simply unnecessary. I don't see any way that this administration will be interested in conducting a nuclear test. In fact, I expect the United States Congress to assert itself and to make clear that there can be no policy of resuming nuclear tests without explicit congressional approval, which would be one step in the correct direction. Now, what can be done with the CTBT, and here this is speculation, not based on anything that I have seen from Biden administration spokespeople, but I would hope that there could be an effort from the United States and from other major states to work on additional confidence building measures. There is no prohibition in the treaty for the United States and other states with nuclear testing facilities, that includes China and Russia, to take additional confidence building measures that would demonstrate not only to each other, but to skeptical American senators, the value of the CTBT. There were allegations from US intelligence officials that Russia was in violation of the treaty and had conducted positive yield tests. I don't have access to American intelligence. I don't know how credible or upon what that was based. I am skeptical because of the Trump administration's policy of manipulating and selectively releasing intelligence. But there is still a point here at which either Russia or the United States or China could take a brave initiative and say, we are prepared to have certain measures that can both eliminate such accusations and can also demonstrate the value that the CTBT would have once it is fully entered into force. On the key question of United States ratification, I'm afraid that this is still a distant prospect. The United States Senate is closely divided, and everything that Mr. Biden wishes to accomplish in the domestic or foreign policy field will be fiercely contested by the opposite party in the US Senate. He has to pick his battles, and he has to pick battles that he can win. And for that reason, I do not expect in the next 2 years at least that the administration will ask the Senate to try again to ratify the treaty. I hope that it will undertake an education campaign, that there will be opportunities not only for the US, but for other governments to invite senators to see what nuclear testing is and how it can be adequately monitored and controlled. I don't expect that this will be very high in the priority list of an administration that faces a wide range of foreign policy and domestic crises. I hope that other countries don't simply wait for the United States. I and I salute the Russian Federation ratification. I wish that China would move ahead on ratification. For it to hide behind the United States Senate may be as good tactical diplomacy, but it is a stunning failure of global leadership. The Biden administration, I expect, will reaffirm that it wants the United States to ratify the treaty so that it can enter into force. But as I said, I've got to be honest with you, that is not going to happen within the next 2 years. Thanks for your time. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you, Thomas. Much appreciated. I hope that there were a couple of kind of sound interruptions, but I hopefully will continue without further glitches. Maybe what I would propose to for our panelists while we're not speaking to turn off the video so that we have fewer interference with the image and the sound of the speaker. Thank you, Tom, and Ambassador Ulyanov, the microphone is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Elena. First of all, I would like to thank you and other organizers event. To see familiar faces and closely collaborated in the past to my satisfaction. I must say that Tom is especially attractive on this photo, taken when he was a little bit younger. So this year marks the 25th anniversary from the opening of the treaty for signature. It's a good opportunity to assess the current situation around the treaty, as well as the situation in CTBTO PrepCom. Needless to say that the opening of CTBT for signatures in 1996 was a real milestone in the history of international relations, in the history of multilateral efforts in the field of non-proliferation and arms control. A tremendous work has been done since that time. Now the treaty enjoys almost universal support. It was ratified by 168. For the vast majority of countries, including my country, the CTBT has become an integral element of international security architecture. Today, we are witnessing the establishment of an unprecedented global verification mechanism to ensure compliance with and this verification mechanism stands already 90% completed, including in my country. We made significant progress. At the same time, it's extremely regrettable that after a quarter of century after its opening for signature, CTBT has not yet become operational. In recent years, the situation even degraded when the previous US administration openly stated that it will not seek ratification of this treaty and was preparing for possible resumption of nuclear tests. As I understand it, now the situation looks better. I hope that the new administration will demonstrate a more responsible approach to international security. And Tom actually confirms that probably we should not expect dramatic developments. It's good. Of course, US is not obliged to be the first among the remaining 8 countries from the list of 44 to ratify the treaty. But objectively, the United States is the major possessor of nuclear weapons and claims to be a leader in international relations. So all other states who remain outside the treaty look at the United States first. And Washington can change for the better the current situation if it moves towards ratification. I hope that sooner or later it will happen. We note that in the CTBTO PrepCom, we believe that the main slogan in the CTBTO PRIPCOM must be a call for the earliest, soonest entry of the treaty into force. Instead, we hear very often a different message. The states cannot further delay establishment of their facilities of the international monitoring system. It's practical quotation. Such statements are very misleading. They change subject and shift attention from principled issues to technicalities, important but technicalities. It's obvious that prior to the CTBT's entry into force, the verification mechanism, no matter how developed and effective it is, operates in a test and provisional mode. This is provided by the mandate of the CTBTO PRIPCOM. Therefore, until CTBT becomes operational, we cannot justifiably criticize states for some delays in construction of their IMS stations and provision of data transmissions. I noted that today my good colleague Gerhard, the ambassador of Germany, said that, how did he put it? He said that provisional operation of the treaty is essential. I don't know what he meant. I hope not provisional application, because provisional application is out of question, as a matter of fact. Now, a few words about the Provisional Technical Secretariat and its work in the pandemic period. Of course, the consequences of the pandemic, including for the Commission, have yet to be assessed. Nevertheless, we can already say that the Secretariat of the Preparatory Commission, led by Mr. Lasina Zerber, has ensured the successful and uninterrupted functioning of the organization in emergency situation. It's a good, very great result. The last point, I believe others will hardly touch upon this issue. I must tell frankly that the atmosphere in the PRIPCOM has deteriorated. It is spoiled to a very serious extent, significant extent. Last October, for the first time in its history, PRIPCOM voted on substantive issue. For the first time, my impression is that a group of states made very significant mistakes when they refused to consider in a more constructive manner the issue of restoration of voting rights of those countries who are in arrears vis-à-vis the budget. And their voting rights were restored on a selective basis against any logic, without any explanation, and this led to growing antagonism among members of the Commission. I hope that this trend will be stopped and will not be repeated right now when we undertake the second attempt to elect the executive secretary. By the way, regardless who wins the election for the post of the executive secretary, it is important that a new leader continues to work towards entry into force of the CTBT, preserves all the positive traditions developed over the past quarter of century in the organization, and ensures stability and predictability of its work, which under no circumstances should be politicized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ulyanov. I'm sure there will be some of the discussions we will have later, but for the sake of time, I want to make sure that we do not take time from the next panel as well, and still have time to have a discussion after all speakers present. It is my greatest pleasure to pass the microphone to Angela Kane. Angela.
Thank you very much, Elena, and thank you to Executive Secretary Zerbo and the ambassadors of Algeria and Germany for also hosting this event and sponsoring this event, which I think is very, very timely. And I have been asked here to speak as a member of the group of eminent persons. So I'm very happy to do that. And I've also been asked to address the Sustainable Development Goals, which I hope to do very briefly, though it's a huge subject, as you all know. Now, the GEM, the Group of Eminent Persons, which was already mentioned by the Executive Secretary, was launched in September 2013. And I was very honored when he asked me in 2015, after I left the United Nations, to join this group. And I've done this very gladly and done it to the best of my ability, I think. But the members really support and complement efforts to promote the treaties entry into force through their expertise, their experience, and the political standing. Now, who are we? We are 29 individuals. We are from 23 countries. And of course, they're also ex officio members. And in this case, it's the presidents of the Article 14 process, namely for 2020, 2021, it's the Foreign Minister of Algeria and the Foreign Minister of Germany. Now, 29 is a small number when you compare this to 1,000, as you heard, that the youth group members have, and they will, of course, speak after me. So I look forward to that. But what have we done? We have adopted press statements, and we have also adopted declarations as a group. And for example, in 2019, when it was alleged that low-yield nuclear testing was taking place, the GEM issued a statement on this development and reminded of the zero-yield understanding of Article 1 of the CTBT, which prohibits all nuclear test explosions, whatever the level of energy released, and called for, of course, the entry of the force into treaty. And then 2020, and this was an incident that was already referred to by Tom Countryman, we released also a statement in reaction to media reports that senior officials in the US had discussed the possibility of conducting a demonstration nuclear test explosion. Now, we are helpful, we GEM members, by publishing articles, by op-eds, which are supporting the CTBT, and we are regularly in contact through digital means, and we're always asking that the GEM members keep the CTBT informed, or the CTBTO informed of their activities, and we then share that. And I thank very much the CTBTO to Secretariat to actually facilitate that. Now, for example, in November last year, the Astana Club Global Security Meeting hosted a session on strategic timing of resumption of nuclear dialogue, which had not only Executive Secretary Zerbo participating, but very, very senior participants. It brought a very high level of attention to the issue of nuclear testing. And another meeting focused on the role of the EU in mitigating the effects of nuclear testing, also in October last year, which was organized by a member of the European Parliament. And what is interesting in this context is that with the Treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which entered into force just last week, the issue of the effects of nuclear testing on the population and the environment have really become more prominent, as the TPNW, the ban treaty, provides for victim compensation, and that's really a novelty in the juridical sense. Now, I also want to address the question of the cooperation between the GEM and the youth group, and that's been actually very, very productive, and I think very, very good. There have been meetings that were organized jointly to foster cooperation and membership. And I remember one such meeting that took place in Nur-Sultan 2 years ago, and that was followed by a visit to Semipalatinsk, the huge test site in Kazakhstan, where I think it was 456 nuclear tests were conducted during the time of the Soviet Union. And the other GEM initiative that I wanted to mention is actually to build a coalition of actors engaged in the defense and promotion of the CTBT. And the question was, of course, when we discussed this among ourselves, how do we actually do that? And we came to the agreement that we had 3 initiatives in this area. One was by refreshing the common arguments in favor of the treaty and the entry into force. And 2, by identifying new arguments that are appealing and also compelling to member states. And 3, by commissioning research to frame and develop these arguments, and then to garner the empirical evidence to support them, as well as to create a body of expertise among academics and expert champions, as we call them, of the CTBT and the treaty. So I'm very, very happy to tell you that one of our GEM members, and that's Lord Des Brown of Ladyton, was successful in raising funds for this purpose. And we felt that the initiative would really benefit from academic backstopping, and negotiations have therefore been conducted with Cambridge University in the UK, which has agreed to host a small unit. But unfortunately, because of the pandemic situation, the situation has delayed everything. And now we are hopeful that the work can start soon, because it's a very important initiative that will bring academic input into the debate. And I'm sure that another meeting that we will have on this, you will hear on this. Let me now turn to the Sustainable Development Goals, which, as you know, were adopted by the United Nations in 2015. They were to be completed in 2030, but of course, as we know now, also from the latest reports, this will most likely not be as hopeful as we had all expected, but it is going forward, and there are initiatives that are being taken to implement the SDGs. There are 17 goals in these Sustainable Development Goals. There are 169 targets, and when I look at the latest reports, you have had over 1,000 events, you've had over 1,200 publications already, you had over 5,000 actions, and so this is really the latest stand as we do now. And the question that we had posed ourselves is, how can the CTBTO contribute to the SDGs? And basically, none of the 17 goals specifically mention CTBTO, but that does not mean that CTBTO cannot contribute to it. And therefore, there are 3 aspects where I think it is a very good contribution possible. One is the normative work by convening expert panels and other fora to facilitate dialogue and problem solving, but also advocacy to a variety of stakeholders. But there's also operational work by providing direct service to align with each identified need in the SDGs. And the third one is the technical work through the provision of technical expertise related to each of the sectoral targets given in the SDG. Now, I want to suggest 3 examples in this, and that will be my suggestion in this particular exercise. First one is Goal 3. And Goal 3 is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. And that is, of course, you know that 29 August was declared as the International Day Against Nuclear Testing. And this calls for increasing awareness about the effects of nuclear weapons test explosions and any other nuclear explosions, and also the need for their cessation as one of the means achieving the goal of a nuclear-free world. So that would be a very important contribution to make, particularly when we look at the nuclear tests that have been conducted around the world, not only in Semipalatinsk, but in other countries as well. And the next goal is goal number 11, and that is make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And even though this goal, when you look at it, really focuses on housing, on transport, on environment and human settlements in general, but it has indicators which measure the number of countries that adopt and implement national risk reduction strategies. And this is really very important because the scientific work of CTBTO is a major contribution to disaster reduction and mitigation. Let's look at the important work of the International Monitoring System, the International Data Center, the disaster civic and scientific application of CTBT data and technology, and also, of course, of the CTBTO's global warning system. And we've seen that very, very recently. There have been notices being put out about earthquakes. I also remember the 2011 Fukushima disaster in Japan, and also the tracking of Fukushima's radioactive release and the event's aftermath. So this is all extremely important, and I think makes a very considerable contribution to the Sustainable Development Goal number 11. And the last one I want to mention is goal 15, and that is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable and terrestrial ecosystem, managing forests, combat desertification, and reverse land degradation. And that is really to look at the land degradation, by which I mean that it's the land that is degraded over total land area. And even though the drafters were more concerned with desertification when you look at the goals, I think it is also requesting countries to strive to a land degradation neutral world. And that is, again, the land degradation we know that is being caused by nuclear testing. And that is well known and documented. The United States conducted over 1,000 nuclear tests between 1945 and 1992. And there was very little information that was released during this time about the human exposure to the fallout, but also thousands of miles of land were contaminated due to the effects of radiation, and that remains at times still off limits to human habitation. This is something that I think is very clear in the contribution to this goal 15. There were studies of the damage and also of contamination of land have been conducted, and the scientific evidence really leads us to the overwhelming conclusion that states must be encouraged to remediate as far as possible the long-term damage caused by nuclear testing and report this to the global community. And that links up again to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, as I mentioned. And the goal 17, the last one, is to strengthen the means of implementation and to revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. And that is very much a focus on technology, asking countries to report the number of science and or technical cooperation agreements and programs between countries, type of cooperation. And here again, the CTBTO is extremely strong because it has this very impressive international monitoring system and is something that makes a considerable contribution, very strong contribution to this field, and therefore is an indicator in this goal 17, which is very much in line with what the CTBTO is taking. So I think that this is the CTBTO Science and Technology Conference Series. I think the most recent one took place in 2019, Attract Scientists, again, something that very much feeds into this. And as a conclusion, I can only say that CTBTO makes an incredible contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, and I will leave it at that. Thank you, Elena, back to you.
Thank you, Angela. I'm so grateful for your tour through the Sustainable Development Goals and linkages between the CTBT, CTBTO and its verification system, and some of them. It's important, and also obviously hats off to the work of the group of eminent persons. Your statements are really strong and are being noticed. Now to our representatives of the youth group of the CTBTO. Yeseul, why don't you go next?
Thank you very much, Elena. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so honored to join today's event, and I'm especially pleased to represent, together with Sylvia, the CTBTO Youth Group. I'd like to introduce what the CTBTO Youth Group is. The CYG launched in 2016 and has grown to 1,000 members in the world. The CYG goal is to contribute to global security and peace by promoting the CTBT and its verification regime. The CTBT plays a key role in preventing and inhibiting horizontal proliferation of nuclear weapons in non-nuclear countries, as well as vertical proliferations in nuclear weapon states. The CTBT is the key to closing the door on nuclear testing for good, and we must not forget that this is the aspiration that many non-nuclear countries, many non-nuclear weapon states have had for decades. Indeed, the promise of a CTBT was crucial in achieving the indefinite extension of the NPT in 1995. The final documents of the 2000 and 2010 NPT review conferences highlights not only the desire of the NPT membership to achieve the entry into force of the CTBT, but also the crucial link between the CTBT and the NPT. The chair's summary of the 2019 PrepCon for the 10th NPT Review Conference also calls for early entry into force of the CTBT. So I hope that the CTBT will feature on top of the agenda at the 2021 NPT Review Conference. But as we know, the CTBT is still not in force. So CTBT entry into force is important to advance the goal of disarmament under the NPT. The P5 as responsible nuclear weapon states recognized by NPT carry a special responsibility in facilitating the entry into force of the CTBT. So they should revisit the CTBT in their P5 process discussion. So there is widespread non-nuclear weapon states interested in the P5 adopting a formula at the next NPT Review Conference, reiterating the Reagan-Gorbachev Declaration that a nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought. I strongly encourage the P5 to make a commitment to upholding the international norm against the nuclear testing in any such statements. So this truly matters to my generation. The non-entry into force of the CTBT is a big worry for the young generation, especially for young Koreans. As a Korean, I can say that CTBT should enter into force for peace on the Korean Peninsula and to achieve the complete denuclearization of North Korea. So after several years of diplomacy with North Korea still is the biggest threat to Northeast Asia security. And after years of engagement, North Korea still has its nuclear arsenal. So North Korea is also the only country that has violated the international norm against the nuclear testing in the 21st century. So a crucial step toward peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula is for North Korea to join the CTBT. So this would not only alleviate tension on the Korean Peninsula, but also serve as an important confidence-building measure for the international community that North Korea is sincere about the elimination of nuclear weapons. So I'm sure many other young people will agree with me, and it is time to achieve the entry into force of the CTBT, and now is a time to ratify the CTBT. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Yeseul. I think you make a very strong pitch, and particularly why it is important for your generation. We have another representative from the youth group, Sylvia Mishra. Sylvia, please take the floor.
Hi, Elena. I am so pleased to be here. Thank you so much, the VCDNP Center, for inviting me. It is such an honor and a pleasure to speak with such distinguished panelists. As I was thinking about the question about whether the CTBT is a Cold War relic or does it have relevance in the present 21st century challenges, it comes to me and it comes to bearing some thought about the fact that great power rivalry is back on focus, and countries are sharpening and enhancing their nuclear arsenal in inventory. And at such a time when we see a slew of emerging technologies that are developing, and like there's a fast integration of some emerging technologies with strategic weapons, it is important for us to also think like the traditional ways of looking at deterrence is probably not the best approach. And hence, looking at some of these present developments, it seems that the CTBT is so relevant in the 21st century because of its importance being an important integral part of the global nuclear non-proliferation, arms control, and disarmament order. And saying that, it seems that countries ought to do a better job in terms of reiterating their commitment on unilateral moratorium on non-testing. It seems that with the Biden administration coming in, there's another opportunity to once again reiterate US global leadership and commitment towards nuclear non-testing. Tom Countryman laid out some really important points about the US leadership in this role. And I just wanted to also underscore the importance that P5 countries should reiterate their commitment to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 2310, which talks about like non-testing. So saying that, I also in my remarks would like to reflect on what are some of the creative ways that the CTBT can be elevated in the NPT conference. And the fact that the NPT review cycle is upon us, there are some creative ways that the profile of the CTBT probably can be elevated, because it should be important to note that the CTBT and the international monitoring system networks forms an important bridge building effort between NPT and non-NPT countries, and therefore the engagement of non-NPT states in hosting and hosting facilities of the international monitoring system is important. And saying that, it also should be noted that there are the Annex II countries, and especially with a focus on South Asia, India and Pakistan, whilst they tested their nuclear weapons in 1998, they are not are signatories to the NPT. However, they have both the countries have declared unilateral moratorium on non-testing. However, one of the ideas that I put forward to the group, and I have written about it, is if India and Pakistan are to host international monitoring system facilities in their countries, it might act as a confidence building measure between the two countries. It might showcase that both the countries are responsible stewards of their nuclear weapons. And even though if right at this point of time there might be little impetus for both countries to engage with the CTBTO in terms of entry into force and signature and ratification. However, an interim and a good step would be engaging with the CTBTO's international monitoring system. We've already seen the benefits that international monitoring system and the International Data Center provides in providing data about earthquakes and tsunami. In a region like South Asia, and especially in 2004, when we have seen the devastating effects of the tsunami in the Indian Ocean region in 2004, when almost 230,000 people died. Having and hosting international monitoring system facilities in countries like India and Pakistan can provide substantive data in order to track and detect earthquakes. And plus, additionally, this also forms an important step towards confidence building measure between the two countries at a time when the relationship and political relationship has been on the fray. Saying that, one of the other ways that the profile of the international monitoring system and the CTBT as a whole can be uplifted in the NPT review conference is also through undertaking education on disarmament and non-proliferation. The Vienna Center itself has taken a leading role in terms of non-proliferation education and disarmament education. And one of the things that in the NPT context that can be done is essentially to further this initiative. At the CTBTO youth group, which I'm so proud to be part of, one of the things that the platform has really enabled emerging scholars like myself is to essentially put on a thinking hat in terms of engaging on various non-proliferation, arms control, and disarmament issues, and thereby essentially by talking in a more detailed manner about the importance of nuclear disarmament education. A lot of the state parties can play a pivotal role in making that front and center of their initiative. And my last point, which I would like to end by saying that the CTBT and the Preparatory Commission has played a leading role in terms of gender initiative as well, which is extremely important. This is something that I'm extremely passionate about bolstering gender equities in the nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament field. The CTBTO has a gender balance like profile of folks who work as engineers in the IMS and the International Data Center. Getting more women and scholars who can effectively engage on nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament issue is an important cause, and the CTBTO has taken a leading role in that, which needs to be appreciated. And to conclude, I would say that there is an historic a chance to once again underscore the importance of the CTBT as an instrument of furthering global arms control, non-proliferation, and eventually disarmament. So therefore, countries should take greater note and not only look at the multilateral setting, but also take unilateral measures to engage effectively with the CTBTO. I conclude there. Thank you for indulging me.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. And I'm very grateful you also brought the gender issues, and that's extremely important across the international organizations. At this point, I would like for the panelists to unmute their cameras because we will go into the Q&A and discussion session. Just a little reminder to everyone, and people have been, the participants have been following that. We will take questions once you put them in a Q&A function of Zoom. It would be ideal if you indicate who your question is directed to. Sometimes it's not clear. I also want to say that we unfortunately won't be able to direct our questions at Ambassador Ulyanov because he had to leave to another urgent matter. But we do have all the remaining participants in session 1. And there are a few questions that we started answering, and I would probably not raise again the question about the prospects for Biden administration to ratify the CTBT. I think Tom Countryman has already answered that question, and I anticipate that we would also have some discussion of that in the second session during the presentation given by Darrell Kimball, who heads the Arms Control Association. Angela has already touched a little bit about the TPNW and its effect, but maybe this is something that I would also like to point, and there are a number of questions coming from the audience about the relationship between the CTBT and the recent, literally last week, entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and the questions related regarding the CTBTO status, whether it will be coming as an observer to this meeting. I would put a broad and even question of what you think about states that are outside of the treaty observing the meetings, the first review conference of the TPNW, and where are the complementarities, and obviously very important questions that are asked about the CTBT France GEM roles. I think that's, Angela, for you. Particularly in the upcoming NPT review conference, possibly what their role could be within the NPT review conference and on the CTBT issues. There is a question again about prospects of US ratification that's already been answered, but Tom, maybe you want to add to it. But there is also a question about the prospects of China and other Annex 2 countries ratifying or signing the CTBT. And was another interesting question about maybe something that we will save for later. In the meantime, what I would do is when either the panelists could wave at me and tell who of them would like to take the floor, or I will call on you. Tom, okay.
There's many good questions in the Q&A, and I'll give brief answers to just a couple of them. First, someone asks if the Democrats can expand upon their majority in the Senate in the elections next year. That improves the chances for ratification, but ratification requires 67 senators, and even the most optimistic Democrat does not expect they'll get to 67 in next year's election. There's a question about the prospects for ratification by other Annex 2 countries, and I would hope that those countries that have every reason to ratify no longer hide behind the United States, and that would include China and Iran and Pakistan and India. I think rather than simply criticizing the United States for its inability under its own constitution to ratify, they could show some leadership. The other questions are about TPNW, which gets into much broader issues. I would only say that the effect of the entry into force into TPNW is to strengthen the international non-proliferation architecture. I wish that there would be a more welcoming, more positive, or at least more neutral attitude from Washington, Moscow, Paris, and others to the entry into force of the TPNW. It's important to recognize that these treaties, the NPT, the CTBT, the TPNW, overlap. They're not perfectly consistent with each other, but they all point in the same direction, and they should all be taken seriously by both weapon states and non-weapon states. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Angela. Angela, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Elena. Yes, interesting questions and good questions. And I see some familiar names also there on the questions. So that's always good to have people. One of the questions was really about the GEM members. Would they be attending the NPT review conference? And I must say that that is at this point, of course, unknown. I will tell you that if it involves travel to New York, where the review conference will take place, it depends, of course, whether people are able to, whether they can come. But I know that those who are in New York or who will be in New York will definitely attend the proceedings, because everyone in the GEM has background and long experience in disarmament, non-proliferation, arms control, and is therefore very interested, but also to help further the goals. There have been meetings, for example, for the August 29 conference and also the conference in September during the high-level week that takes place with the CTBTO, and GEM members have actually been there, and GEM members have actually spoken there, which was facilitated, of course, by the executive secretary. So that was very helpful. And in other efforts also, what has been happening, and I think there was another question on that, is that there were people also who have traveled to various countries to intervene with governments, to urge them to ratify the CTBT and therefore make it possible to enter into force. That has not been made very public, because I think this is like what we would call quiet diplomacy, and it never does very well that you kind of shout it from the rooftops. But on the other hand, I can assure you that behind the scenes, there is a lot of activity going on. And so far, I wish we would be more successful. But on the other hand, there's this saying in German, which sort of says, the constant drop makes a dent in the stone. So I think that that's really what we're all about. And when it comes about the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, there will be a Conference of States parties within the first 12 months of the entry into force, which, as we said, was last week. I don't know when that will be. That will be a decision of the states parties. But I have a feeling that it probably will not be prior to the NPT review conference. It will most likely be after the NPT review conference, maybe closer to when the 1-year limit comes up in January next year. But that's just a speculation from my part, because again, there's a lot going on in New York at the first committee, etc. So maybe there's a time to wait for that. And maybe by that time, there would be also more states parties. Right now, they're 51, they're 85 signatories. And whether there is a possibility to attend as observers by those who are not signatories, who are not ratifiers, I would encourage that very much, because it sends a signal that it's not like one against the other, or we're not adversaries. We're all in this together. It's a framework for arms control. It's a framework for non-proliferation. It's a framework for disarmament. Very important that we set signals, and we give these signals to make sure that we all know that we're on the same wavelength. I also noticed that our friend Alan Weir had a question about the nuclear testing, and he refers to the treaty, to the CTBT. But I want to say something else, and that is really very interesting. And I heard it just for the first time at a recent webinar where Gaukar was talking about and she said, now we have basically two standards. We have a treaty, i.e. the TPNW, which is already into force, which forbids nuclear testing, and we have the CTBT, which is not yet in force, but it also forbids nuclear testing. So that's really a very interesting conundrum, but I think we're just going to have to live with that for a while. But I do think that the norm against nuclear testing is very strongly being reinforced by not only the CTBT, but of course also by now having the TPNW enter into force. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. There are a number of other interesting questions, and I think maybe because of the technical difficulties or in the interruption, some of the presentations that were made in the first part didn't, or maybe people joined later. There's kind of a repeated question about the Biden administration approach to ratification. And also Ambassador Soltani is asking about the NPR nuclear posture review change regarding nuclear tests. I think you addressed both of these issues, Tom, but maybe to quickly highlight them as well in the final remarks. I think there is a very interesting question regarding the, I'm looking at, to Mr. Zlauvinen about the role, what role could the CTBTO play at the upcoming NPT review conference, especially with regards to the outreach, what outreach it could do. So maybe you could take up that question. Then there is an interesting question coming from Jacek Savage. In 2000, General Shalikishvili written an interesting report on raising the US decision makers' awareness on CTBT. Oops, that's jumping on my screen, all these questions. Apply the step-by-step approach on future possible ratification. Maybe it would be advisable to look at this document again. So again, I think it's more to you, Tom. Again, what are the chances that 5 or 6 Republicans can flip and join the Democrats? I'll look for other questions in the meantime, but maybe first I'll give the floor to Ambassador Zlauvinen, and then we'll come to you, Tom.
Thank you, Elena. As I mentioned in my statement, the NPT and the CTBT have been linked for over 50 years. As I said also before, in the outcomes of previous review conferences, those who had outcomes, the CTBT is mentioned. As I say, it's mentioned in the practical steps, on the 13 practical steps agreed by the 2000 NPT Review Conference, as well as in the 64th point action plan of the 2010 Review Conference outcome that is related also to the CTBT. So obviously the link is there, have been there. I believe there have been a question on how to include the CTBT on the agenda of the review conference in August this year. But there is no need, in the sense that it's part of the discussions in every review conference. As I said in my statement, I expect many state parties to the NPT to raise the issue and the importance of the CTBT and its entry into force. And therefore, those state parties are going to be pushed for language to be incorporated in a possible outcome document. So it will be up to them to do it, and I'm sure they will do it. But then we have to see what kind of agreement we'll reach at the review conference. And of course, the review conference, the NPT review conference, will serve also as a platform for continuing the outreach that say parts to the CTBT, and in particular GEM, as Angela Kane has mentioned, normally they do during the NPT review conferences. We have seen tremendous efforts by those state parties and eminent persons at the previous events related to the review conference, and therefore I'm expecting those actions, side events and meetings to take place at the August meeting of the review conference. So I think that it's a mutual benefit to work together, but of course understanding that there are some discrepancies still by state parts of the NPT, some only few, regarding just the CTBT, and that's, I think, we have to overcome. And again, it will depend on whether we get an outcome document out of the review conference, what kind of document, and therefore the language is going to be crucial. But again, that is going to be decided at the negotiations at the review conference, and those who have experience at previous review conferences, they know best that the important part of the negotiations normally take place at the very last few days of the review conference. So we will have to wait until then. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And probably the role of the CTBTO itself in outreach. We'll have somebody speaking from the Secretariat maybe in the next session. Tom, I'm going to give you the floor, and maybe we'll take one more question before we end the session.
To answer as quickly as I can, there's a good question. Could 5 or 7 Republican senators be persuaded to vote for CTBT? Yes. However, it would take 17 Republican senators to obtain ratification. That's not going to happen in the next year or two. Second, Ambassador Sultania asks about the statement in the 2018 Nuclear Posture Review that refers to the possibility of resuming testing. I don't know if there will be a new nuclear posture review. They are useful instruments for looking at the range of issues involved in nuclear policy, but they take a long time to prepare. I certainly expect long before there is a new nuclear posture review for the Biden administration to make a clear statement that there is no need for additional testing by the United States, and that it would be a dangerous action, so that there is no intention of proceeding in that way. Jacek refers to an interesting document. I don't know about how to work on persuading American senators. And Jacek, if you send that to me or where you found it, I would be very interested to look at it. And finally, our colleague from Guatemala asks about the possibility of other Annex II states getting together to cooperatively move ahead on ratification with or without the United States. I think it's a great idea. I am proud of the historical role that the United States has played as a leader in non-proliferation and arms control efforts, but I have never believed that United States is the only country that can provide leadership. So I would love to see an initiative of other states moving forward jointly on ratification. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. You actually asked the questions that I wanted to pose to the panel. And because we are already a little bit over the time we allotted to this session, I would like to first ask if any of the panelists would like to take the floor for the last kind of remarks before we can, before at the end of the session. That sounds like no to me. Sylvia? Okay.
Can I just come in? I thought there was an important suggestion on the Q&A box about the importance of disarmament and non-proliferation education, and the fact that disarmament and non-proliferation education has played such a pivotal role and is already established within the NPT context. United Nations General Assembly resolution 53/33 discussed at length and provided a 34 agenda step on the importance of disarmament and non-proliferation education. Now, the CTBTO plays an important role in advancing the disarmament and non-proliferation education to the CTBTO youth group. But one of the also important factors has been the forum has been an important point where technical experts and scientists of different countries can come and do a mind share of important activities that are happening in this. And I would like to allude to the Science and Technology Conference that is hosted by the CTBTO, which brings together scientists from India and Pakistan, where they can engage with each other. And it also, in a way, is an important measure of engaging non-NPT states in a more collaborative scientific framework.
Sylvia, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's a very great way to end our session, and I am really grateful to all of our speakers for their time, and for our listeners. Once again, apologies for any technical difficulties at the beginning. And we are going on a 10-minute break, and we'll resume a little bit after 15 o'clock here.